Beau of the fifth column recently discussed uh, Putin's puffing his chest out about the START treaty. And even though it sounds scary, he's talking about nuclear arms and all of that. I will say it does not bode well for Ukraine, but it is also not necessarily what it sounds like. Let's have a look at what he's talking about.
Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Beau again. So, today we're going to talk about new starts. We're going to talk about the New START Treaty, what it is, what it does, what it doesn't do, and kind of put it into focus. It's been getting a lot of coverage lately, and it hasn't actually been bad coverage, to be honest. For the most part, most outlets are avoiding the obvious fear mongering that could accompany this at this point. But there are some who are engaging in it. So we're going to kind of go over it. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, Putin, in his speech, said that Russia was suspending compliance with the New START treaty. This is a treaty that provided regulations on how nuclear arms are deployed. There are some common misconceptions, and we'll clear those up because even though there isn't a lot of fear-mongering going on, some additional context might put people more at ease. Okay, so the first thing you hear about this is that it limits the number of nuclear weapons. No, that's not true. It's really not. That's not what it does.
I'm just going to pop off screen. He's nailing it so far.
It limits the number deployed, ready to go at any point in time. That's what it limits. Not the number that are available, just the number deployed. Now, people seem, there are some who seem concerned because now we're at greater risk. Not really. We're really not. I want to say the treaty limited it to 1,550 warheads, something in that range.
So for perspective, I'm sure he's going to go into it, but for perspective, the treaty limited the number of warheads that can be out there to a number that is still, in short, total destruction for us all. Hence the little acronym. It's a START, but it wasn't actually okay. We can all breathe easy now. If you lived through the Cold War, you have a sense of how absolutely ridiculous the world's nuclear arsenal is.
If you were to pull up modeling on nuclear exchange, okay, most of them are around 500. It's a 500 warhead exchange. Presents enough to do that and remain in compliance with the treaty 3 times over. It doesn't actually limit the potential destruction at all. It also does not limit tactical nukes. Even in the limitations, there is some fuzzy math. A bomber, as an example, is counted as 1 warhead, I believe.
Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna skip forward a little bit because he's essentially saying the same thing. It is it's a limitation that essentially doesn't matter if it comes down to the actual deployment of nuclear arms, because with the number out there, everything's still just glass. Also, if it actually came to that, I don't believe it would. Nobody who has, to my knowledge, nobody who has the ability to launch one of these things is dumb enough to not understand what the consequences would be. I don't think it should be taken lightly, but just to kill any demagoguery that might happen, it's a ridiculous idea that these nations would be seriously considering using these weapons at this stage for any reason.
It's also worth noting that it appears Putin is talking about the inspections. Part of the treaty allowed each party, the U.S. and Russia, to inspect the other's capabilities, kind of. And Putin's saying that he's not going to allow that anymore. Okay, and that sounds scary, except for the fact that I'm not even sure it's been happening. They were suspended during the public health issue, and I actually haven't seen any news of them restarting. They might have, but understand there was a very lengthy period where it wasn't occurring at all. There are other methods, such as surveillance flights, that can help determine a lot of this. So measuring compliance, not really that big of a deal. Now, overall, for most people, if you are a Cold War kid, none of this is surprising. If you're Gen Z, you might just be realizing how many nukes are pointed at the United States as you watch this, and it might be a little unnerving. Please remember that this situation has existed for like half a century. Another thing that's worth pointing out
before he gets there, if you know, a lot of times I talk about if you're like a regular watcher of WYCD, help inform some of the new folks. Like tell them, hey, links in the description always for what you can do. However, I would say take some of that attitude and apply it to talking about politics in the real world, particularly if you are somebody who lived through the Cold War and you find yourself talking to a group of lefties, and some of them are some of these younger cats who, don't get me wrong, they have lived through horrors, absolute horrors. The situation with school shootings, they got to go to school every day and not know if this is the day that the quiet kid shows up with an assault rifle. It's bad, but this will be a new one to them. The reality that there is world-destroying technology out there, and we have threatened each other with it on a nation-to-nation scale. Just walk them through that a little bit. I don't mean try to scare them. I just mean if you hear them panicked because they are now becoming aware of this, as Beau says, walk them off the ledge. You're like, all right, now I grant it's a serious issue, but look, we've been down this road, both in terms of rhetoric and in terms of fingers hovering over the button, and it's demagoguery is a big part of it. People trying to scare us is a big part of it. Just temper the panic a little bit if you've got experience having lived through this.
In Putin's speech is that he said he wouldn't start testing unless the U.S. did. That's developing new stuff and testing the weapons. That indicates that they really don't want another arms race. Assuming that he is telling the truth, and I have no reason to believe he's not, because frankly, Russia can't afford an arms race. So that's good. Now, hearing all of this,
right now, Russia couldn't afford to upgrade to a Happy Meal, or he couldn't afford to upgrade to an extra large Coke. Russia. They are in dire financial straits, and I love to see
say that speech is symbolic or performative, and it is. And this move is symbolic or performative, especially considering, I want to say the treaty expires in like 2 years anyway, maybe 3. But as we have talked about numerous times on the channel, symbolic and performative actually matter. They tell us a lot, and they help shape narratives. So, what is this saying? What is the messaging? There's a couple of different parts to it. One is nuclear saber rattling, which from Russia, okay, whatever. If you were to take all of the Russian government to include the state media, they rattle that saber as often as I say, so today we're going to talk about whatever. It's a very common occurrence. That doesn't mean much. What it may signal is a willingness on the part of the leadership in Russia in an attempt to set the conditions for the populace in Russia to accept even more mobilization. Another draft.
There it is. And that's the danger to Ukraine. Remember, in an earlier segment, we were talking about Russia's long-term strategy for this war is going to be, in part, to try to outlast the U.S. government, as in make it 2 elections and hope that their web brigade gets another right-wing lunatic put in office. By the way, expect a ramping up of Russian cyber attacks. That will mean you're going to see a lot of sudden new right-wing conspiracy theories. You're going to see a lot of websites that come out of nowhere and are suddenly everywhere. That's the Russian web brigade, folks. And yeah, they attacked us in 2016. They have been attacking us periodically since. And as was once my job to defend against in a local news agency, they ramp up their attacks at election time. They will be doing that especially now because they will be trying to cut off the supply of arms to Ukraine. Be on the lookout. And hey, if you see something on the internet that looks like a bot that is promoting pro-Russian propaganda, or just starting what seems to be flame wars in the comments section for no reason, report them. That has a measurable difference on how effective they are. Report them.
A wider war, a longer war. In doing this, Putin admitted how badly the war's going for them.
Boom.
He didn't come out and say it. But to go from a special military operation that's supposed to last days to making a speech near the 1-year anniversary talking about how, well, now we're going to have to, re-examine our nuclear posture. It's an acknowledgement of how bad that war has gone for them. And it might be part of a campaign to introduce the idea to the Russian people of a wider, longer war. A majority of Russians at this point want negotiations to begin. So they're already kind of done with it. That idea, what we talked about in a recent video, all wars are popular for the first 90 days, that's true over there too. There's fatigue setting in. So this may be a signal, a message, the beginning of setting the conditions to prepare the Russian populace for a much longer war than anticipated. That's the real takeaway, not the nuclear stuff. It is important to remember that the government in Russia is made up of Russians, people, not monsters. Nobody wants a nuclear exchange. That's not a thing. People don't actually want that. No sane person, anyway. And I know there's a lot vested in portraying Putin as a madman. And sure,
I mean,
you can say that some of the things that he's done are monstrous. You can say that it's just callous and all of this stuff, and that's true. But it's been calculated. In my
Fair
opinion, it has been very poorly calculated, but it's been calculated. It's
Yeah, I fear stupidity at least as much as I fear insanity. Because a lot of times the outcome is the same. Fortunately, I don't think Putin is I don't think he's dumb at all, frankly. But I certainly don't think he's dumb enough to equate to being as insane enough as you'd have to be to launch. So yeah, in short, I agree wholeheartedly with Beau of the fifth column there. I do believe it's just an attempt by Putin to prepare his folks for that's not how that should play. To prepare his folks, his people, for a longer war, which is absolutely what he's going to try to do. Now, the United States cleared the way, showed the world, really innovated when it comes to invading other countries on a pretext. In the early 2000s and stretching on for 20 years, the United States showed the despots of the world that we are in fact in an era where you can give the slightest pretext for a war and keep it going for a monstrous amount of time. That is one of the dark legacies of the war in the Middle East. And I have to say the war in the Middle East because it started in Iraq and then we just kind of said, we're taking on all comers. That will be something that we're going to have to work to undo. I believe we have an obligation to assist Ukraine simply out of decency, simply because we are mighty. And if that might is worth anything, it should be used in defense of the innocent, which Ukraine is. No doubt about it. However, I believe we have an additional responsibility for having just recently been on the wrong side of this, invading a country on a pretext. We can thank George W. Bush and Colin Powell for that lie. But then, not holding them responsible, and then keeping the war going through the entirety of Obama's administration, through the entirety of Trump's administration, God willing, inshallah. We have a responsibility to clean up our mess, and this is in part our mess. Because Russia saw that the world, the modern world, in fact, will tolerate an indefinite invasion. The populace in the modern world will, if you play up nationalism correctly, will tolerate an indefinite invasion. And it does seem to me like that is what Putin is attempting to do here. He's attempting to say, hey, folks, we're in this for the long haul. It is extremely important that we do our part in America to make sure that the war is unwinnable for him. How do we do that? For God's sake, vote in primaries. Of course, link in the description. Vote in primaries. In addition, you can literally support Ukraine by if you have the funds and if you have the means, you can donate to one of the charities listed in the link below. It's a list of U.S. approved charities. Cripes. U.S. approved charities in Ukraine. Life has not been easy for them. You have Ukrainian officials using Gmail accounts because they've had to set up an infrastructure for dealing with this invasion as they were getting invaded. So do consider donating if it is something that if it offends you that in 2023 one country would think that it can occupy another simply because it felt like taking over some new territory with bullets.